recording. Okay, so we were talking about, first of all, I asked you, did your father ever talk about his parents? And you answered,
not very much. He did mention about the fact that his mother had a small grocery store of some kind in Russia, and included in her holdings at the store was this flock of geese or ducks, and that after my dad's older brother skipped the country to come to the United States, the officials of the federal government took away our ducks, and left her rather destitute. But she was still alive many years later when my uncle, who lived in Milwaukee, got to visit Russia.
Is it Uncle Dave?
Uncle Dave. And Uncle Dave was a music lover and lived in Milwaukee. He was also a pharmacist, and he owned a drugstore. He loved to partake, my uncle loved to partake in music quizzes held by the local radio, to the point where he won so many times he was barred from entering the contest. During one concert in Milwaukee, he discovered that some of the musicians were Russian, and after the concert he went backstage and met some of them and discovered somebody who knew of his lineage, and as a result my uncle and his son Gary, I'm not so sure about his other son Stuart, all went to Russia and met some of the relatives there, including his mother, who was still alive, and they brought her back to the United States. She is buried in a cemetery in Milwaukee.
And her last name is? Okay, but the Bellack last name you think is Bibelnick.
Bibelnick. Family name. My mother's name, or maiden name, was Slobodkin, Lillian Slobodkin. I don't remember her at all, other than that she died of sleeping sickness in Newberry, Michigan, at the age of 39. At that time I was 6 years old. I don't know how the medical system worked then, but she evidently got quite ill, and they put her in an ambulance to take her to Milwaukee, which is the largest city around, and she died en route. I've seen this. We do have a picture of her somewhere. A rather heavy-set lady. And I did get to know her sister quite well. Her sister lived in Milwaukee, and she's my aunt, and I spent a lot of time visiting her just before and after that World War II experience.
Tell memories about your father. You had a lot of memories about your father this morning.
My father was pretty much a businessman and worked hard in the store to create a living for the family. He actually started out by renting that store, and he moved to Newberry from the Milwaukee area, with his horse and wagon. And my brothers, Irvin and sister Esther, about 1920. I'm guessing 2021, 22, because I was born in 26. Most of the time he was strictly interested in the store. He had a real good memory for the debts that people owed him. He was a sucker for some people to provide him credit, which he then later regretted because he lost a lot of money that way to people who didn't pay their bills. He would meet some people on the street and remind them of a bill that they owed. And sometimes that led to him getting punched, where he must have gotten a little obnoxious. He loved music. He played the violin and the mandolin. And quite often we would have music fests in the house where he would play, my older brother Irvin would play the piano, my dad would play the mandolin.
He loved to dance, you said.
Yeah, he occasionally could dance, and he was able to do the business of the Russian dance of jumping down on his haunches and kicking his feet straight out, which took quite a bit of athleticism. But other than that, he was not very good at any sports like baseball or football or anything of that nature.
Tell about the time that this family owed money and then tried to charge.
Oh, yeah, well, I will vividly recall one instance where the family owed the store a large bill. I mean large, like $40, $50, $60 maybe. And the father, I'm not sure, but I think as the father came in and paid $10 on the bill, which was a pretty small percentage, and later on the family sent their daughter in with a large list of groceries, a very large list, because it was more than $10 worth, and my dad had concerns about the fact that the bill was that high, and he refused to give the girl the groceries. Subsequently, the father came in, and there was an alteration, but I don't think any physical. But in the process of the large argument and that, the local police were called, and the father was taken to jail. An hour or two later, things had returned to normal in the store. My father was waiting on a customer, and I was behind the counter stocking some shelves. And the older son of this family came into the store and tapped my dad on the shoulder, and when my dad turned around, the young man punched him, caught him square in the nose, which led to a beautiful black eye, both black eyes. I jumped on the kid. I guess he was probably in his early 20s. Late teens.
And how old were you?
I think I was about 13 or 14, maybe 15. I don't recall that my brother Irvin was still there, which meant that he was already off in college. And I wrestled with a guy till some customers took us apart, and then we had the police come. And the son was then taken to get jail for a day or two, and then released. And my dad had this pretty two black eyes that lasted quite a while. But they no longer did business. So the remainder of the bill never was paid. I don't remember how much it was. But that was exciting.
Tell the story about your dad and the adding machine salesman who tried to sell him an adding machine.
No, I don't recall that. I recall my dad making a bet with the adding machine salesman who my dad was able to show him by using the adding machine he could also subtract. I don't exactly recall how that worked, but my dad was very good with numbers. He could, all the bills were added up pretty much by hand, and when someone bought something, he would write it down on a slip and put it on their bill. He used the adding machine for some of that, but almost everything he did was strictly by hand. He was very learned because he had gotten into some algebra even while in school in Russia, and he was able to help with some math when I was in school. I don't recall exactly what it was he helped me with, but he loved the arithmetic and the math, and he loved music. But he was also a taskmaster and kept us busy in the store. It didn't seem, I don't recall how he instituted obedience, but I was pretty obedient. I would break off every once in a while and go out in the street and play baseball or football with the kids across the street in a place where there was sort of a field. But then he would come out, yell at me, and I'd have to get back into the store to work. We kept the store open pretty much every day, and even Sunday mornings. And sometimes people would come and knock on the front door to get in to get something during off business hours. But we were open most every day until at night, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. But on Sundays, we would always try to go to the lake, which was a full day for a trip for us to 16 miles away, 14 to 16 miles away.
Which lake?
Lake Mountain Lake. But my dad had a habit of procrastinating in the bathroom for hours. So instead of leaving to go to the beach, to the lake at 1 o'clock, sometimes it would be 2, sometimes it would be 3, and sometimes we never went, which was very frustrating.
Tell how your dad died. Well, first his melanomas, and then...
Oh, I do recall one other instance where my older brother Irvin and I were allowed to go out to Round Lake and set up a tent and camp. I don't exactly remember why, but my father wouldn't come out to pick us up. So my brother Irvin walked home and left me at the camp. I'm very fuzzy on how I got back home. But we actually, I think we spent about a week at camp. My dad, for some reason, wouldn't pick us up. In his later years, he developed something called multiple myeloma, which is the illness of the bone marrow in his arms and legs, and he got very sick and very tender to the point where he couldn't rest his arms on anything because they would hurt so much. By that time I was in high school, and somehow my older brother Irvin, who was then working and living in Washington, D.C., arranged for my dad to be taken to the Bethesda National health institute where he was given some treatment. And theoretic, as I recall, he was sort of healed, or that stopped, but he still was very tender and very fragile. And he came back down, very shrunken and very small in stature and not feeling very well. And by that time I was through college and had gone to work in Cleveland. And I was then my wife Mitzi and Debbie and Dave and Debbie were up in Michigan visiting Mitzi's folks when I got the message from the local store there that they had telephoned me that my dad was quite ill and had a bad cold and they had taken him to the hospital. So we drove from Elo, Michigan to Newberry where my folks lived, but when we got there he was already dead. So we then proceeded to Milwaukee where the funeral was going to be held. With my stepmother. Oh, she went separately somehow. How she went there, I don't remember. She and my brother Phil took my dad to Milwaukee to be buried. And there he was buried in a separate cemetery from my mother. My mother was in one cemetery and she was in another. And it took quite a few years before we finally got to find my mother's grave and his grave. And my older brother Irvin knew the location. My older brother Irvin, I think, knew the location of the cemeteries. I didn't. And then later on, my younger half-brother Phil knew the location of the cemeteries. And I never was really sure of it. Is that complete?
Yep, that's good.